we are again. So it's a bit of a challenging week to write a sermon in. I don't know why. Right? So Monday happened, but like how could we think on Monday? And then Tuesday happened, and I couldn't do any thinking on Tuesday. And then Wednesday and Thursday happened, and well, who knows what was going to happen anyway? And right, so it was one of those weeks. Fortunately, at earlier on in the week, I had decided to choose a sermon that was probably going to work, or some passages that were probably going to work in any case, no matter who won the election. So we're going to go this morning with basic no justice, no peace, to remind ourselves that, we're not done yet, and that there's still work to do, but that's okay. Our first passage, the Micah 6 passage, was one we actually discussed Tuesday evening over the campfire. And that was because somebody asked me what my favorite verse was, and then I got the verse right and forgot where it was. How embarrassing was that? Until Corey corrected me because he looked it up on his phone. So anyway, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. Now these verses don't just come out of anywhere. They happened at a very particular time in Israel's history, right? And so, because one of the things that's happening is that well, God is complaining about this gulf between himself and the people, and he's saying, look, I've been trying, I've been doing my best, but there's this huge gulf between you and me. But how did Micah know that? How did Micah know about this gulf between God and the people? And the answer is actually political. The reason that Micah knows there's a gulf between God and the people is that there's these Assyrians coming down from the north, threatening to wipe out all of Israel. And in fact, they do. About 95% of Israel got wiped out. And this for Micah was a very much a political reality, and it was a military reality. And for him, you could not really talk about the political and the military without talking about the spiritual, because these are all connected. These are all part of the same, there's only one reality. And so to not talk about the spiritual is to miss a lot of what's going on. What's interesting to me in this is that in this past election, there's been a lot of time discussing things in the media that in the past would have fallen into the category of the spiritual. There's been a lot of talk in this election about guilt, and about who's guilty of what. There's been a lot of talk about pride. There's been a lot of talk about feelings of superiority, of some people feeling they're better than others. There's been a lot of talk about oppression. And so on all of these things, 20, 30, 50, 80 years ago, would have been spiritual realities. And somehow we've sort of taken them out of the spiritual, which is just the way it is, right? But it's helpful to understand that these are still live categories. It's not like, well, we've taken the spiritual out of it, right? And so it's not very difficult to make the case that, for example, the Electoral College exists because of sin, right? That's why it was begun. That's why it continues. And so it's not like we've left the spiritual behind in our current search for a political system that works. So Micah's looking at his situation and what's going on in his day. And he says, well, how do we deal with this gulf between us and God? And he goes, well, we could be more religious. That would be one way to do it, right? And in his day, being religious meant basically sacrifice, right? Oil and animals and whatever you bring to God, and you have this big, huge religious festival, and he's going to go all over, let's sacrifice our children. Let's just, we're just going to totally do it. And is that going to make God happy? And of course, the answer for Micah is no. And the reason the answer is no is because if the manifestation of sin, if what really makes it obvious right, is basic injustice. He says, look, this is how we can tell, right? God says, look, I created a just system. You're not following it, right? And then there's consequences for that. So if that's the manifestation of sin in our midst, right, then the remedy for sin must be justice, right? If that's the problem, then that's how you fix it. So that's Micah's first suggestion. That's God's first suggestion, is do justice. And then in the translation that Deb read, she had do justice, love, kindness, often translated as mercy, right? The word is, right, various different things. And I like the translation of mercy because it reminds us that it's not all that simple, right? Because in a lot of ways, justice and mercy are opposite things, right? Justice says you get what you deserve. Mercy says, no, you don't, right? And so, right? And so you have both desires at the same time. Sometimes I think that what we do is we pray for mercy for ourselves and justice for our enemies, right? Right, but yeah. So we have this desire for justice and this need for mercy at the same time, and these two things must be working together. And then Jesus tells this parable, which is about an unjust judge. And he comes very close to saying that God is like an unjust judge, although he sort of rescues himself at the end and says, no, God isn't like an unjust judge at all. But he comes very close. Right? He comes very close to heresy. But I think this is what happens when we let reality intrude into our theology. Right? It's much easier just to develop theology without noticing what's going on in the world around us, and just saying, oh no, right, God is all loving and everything is great and fine, and it's all fine, right? And all you got to do is ask, and then blessings come down from heaven, and right. And Jesus looks around him and goes, well, that's not sort of the way I'm seeing things, because he spends a lot of time healing, which means there's a lot of people out there who are sick, and he doesn't get around to everybody, and there's still more sick people, right? And there's still the Romans, they're still there, and there's still lots and lots of stuff. So he says, you got to keep banging on this door. You got to keep banging on God's door over and over and over again, which of course also is a strategy for life, right? That it's not just banging on God's doors, but it's banging on the doors of justice, right? Keep banging on the doors of unjust systems, which is, right? And it's hard, right? It'd be nice this morning to be feeling like, okay, we won. It's all fine, right? We can just sort of coast now. And I think it's worth feeling that for about 15 minutes, just to be able to feel that. But then it's time to get back to work, to keep banging on those doors over and over and over again. This is, right? This is a marathon, not a sprint. And all of this is part of what Luke in his gospel and in the book of Acts calls the way. Luke often calls the early church the way, the people of the way. So Paul comes into the town of Ephesus, and he disrupts things. He disrupts economic systems by saying, hey, why don't we just share? And he disrupts medical systems by doing miracles, so we can sort of, don't need that medical system, which, didn't do much anyway. And he disrupts social systems by putting slaves and free people, by rich and poor, in the same church and saying, you guys have to learn how to get along. He disrupts religious systems and economic systems and all of these things, which in his day were working in something that looked like harmony, at least to those on top. And while the disruption of systems was not his goal, what he was simply trying to do is demonstrate a better way. That if we do things this way, it works better. Right? This is the way things were meant to work. This is the way God wants things to work. But of course, this posed a challenge to certain folks who were benefiting from the old system. This is not news to anybody in this church. Right? And one of the interesting things is that this all turned into something that looked an awful lot like a riot. And this was suppressed by the town clerk, right, who pointed to the judicial system. Right? So we get back to justice again. And this could only have worked if the folks in Ephesus believed in their judicial system, right? That the clerk says, look, there's the judicial system, and the people said, oh, okay, we could do that, right? Then they went home, right? Wouldn't have worked for the widow in Jesus' parable. That if someone had said to the widow, well, look, there's always the justice system, she'd have gone, yeah, that's the problem, is the justice system, right? So the people of Ephesus had a functioning judicial system that they were willing to trust. So such an important part of a stable society. This tells us that justice is a path through conflict. Justice is not the absence of conflict or the way to end conflict. It's the path through, and it's not going to, right? It's one of these endless paths because there's always going to be conflict, and the conflict isn't the problem, right? The problem is, do we have a good path through it? But also to recognize that justice needs to be heavily salted with mercy. On the other side of things, though, pure mercy does not work because the widow's adversary got mercy. Right? The judge in her case said to the other guy, yes, you're guilty, but that doesn't matter. We'll let you get away with it. You get mercy. Right? And the widow didn't want mercy for the other person. She wanted justice. Right? So this sort of balance between justice and mercy continues on. Biblically, justice is not blind. Right? We have this famous statue of Lady Justice holding her scales and with a blindfold over her eyes. And biblically, that's not the vision. Right? The biblical vision is of Lady Justice standing there with her thumb firmly pressed on the side of the powerless. Right? She's got her thumb on one side of the scale because the folks, right, who have power have got their thumbs on the other side of the scale. In my Facebook feed this week, Elizabeth Sneathan responded to something I wrote and said, look, we are all in the same mess here, but we don't all have the same tools. Right? And so this is where you need that thumb on the one side, right? And I know this professionally because in my handyman work, a lot of the work I do involves the fact that I have the right tools and other people don't. That people could be doing the work I do, but they don't have this tool or that tool, and I do. Right? And so, right, a lot of justice, a lot of work is just having the right tools and having access to the right tools, having access to courts and systems that work well. So this is where we are today. We are here seeking justice, heavily weighted with mercy. And we are going to continue to bang on the doors of huge and slow-moving systems. And according to Micah, this is the center of our relationship with God. This isn't a sideline. This isn't a, well, we're going to do church, and we're just going to sort of do church. And then, well, some of you who are interested in that whole justice thing, you can do that too. Right? When Micah lists it, it's like, first do justice, second of all, love, kindness / mercy, and third is walk humbly with your God, right? And the three are part of the same system, but I think it's important to recognize his order. There's something we are called to do, and the first thing is justice. So the folks in Washington, just like the folks in Morgantown, have a lot of mess to clean up, and hopefully they will clean up more than they will make. And meanwhile, we in West Virginia have no lack of our own stuff to deal with. But we are given this standard: justice moderated with mercy. Mercy for those who generally don't receive it. That's our task. Celebrate first, back to work. Amen.